Are you working? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday morning. And let's see, I am going to start by reading the prayer list very quickly. A way of setting our motivation and dedicating for all of their benefits and ourselves. Prayers for happy rebirth, all those killed by natural and man-made disasters, all the Tibetans who have been killed or have been taken their own lives in the struggle for religious freedom. Geshe Sopa Rinpoche, Robin Bungirmo, Dr. Diane Callison, Sally Comer, James Foley, Wendy Johnson, Shamali Mitra, Stephen Sotloff, Miss Kitty, Scooter the dog, James Blumenthal, Roseanne Barona, John Carroll, Joey Gooch, Joe Griffith, that's Job Search, I'm sorry, Robert Palermo, Mark Bristop, Elk Schwartz. Prayers for health and well-being. Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Venerable Margaret McNandrew, Venerable Chucky Lamo, Venerable Losang Sering, all those harmed by natural and man-made disasters, for those Tibetan people and for the Chinese authorities, may the nonviolent path lead to full reconciliation and religious freedom. Roger and Barbara Alexander, Kondo Russell Allen, Ahmed Ahmed Alksar, Mrs. Askew, Lisa Baranski, Jim Barnes, Luce Barona, Narcisse Barona, Roseanne Barona, Kitty Burke, John Carroll, Julie Castello, Jack DeLiso, Deanne Diesler Giussano and her children, Dimitri Diamopoulos, Suzanne Diamopoulos, Andrew Flaherty, Jimmy Gooch and family, Mildred Gooch, Robert Gruber, Tracy Haas Thompson, Annie Hassel, Kathy Hayashi, Francis Hayashi, Travis Henley, Leslie and Joan Inman, Nick Joblins, Kenny Jackson and Bobby, Helly Kasanoff, Nina Kowalski, Mary Lojek, Danny Love, Tom Lynch, RM, Tom McGinnity, Scotty McLean, Sarah Miller, Colleen Mitchell, Jose Marino, Rivera Nielsen, Reba Gail Saunders, family of Shamali Mitra, Evan Myrtle and family, William Oliver, Jai Pandya, Anna Papard and her many cousins throughout the Ukraine, Mark Pristop, Ken Roman, Eileen Rubin and family, Ariana Scott, Rosemary Cease, Sarai, Basil Schutt, Nancy Sorbet, Freddie Todd, Losong Tobden, Bob Utzman, Fran Van Kirk, Dionne Washington, Jessica Whitmore, Shai Walwicki, Bodie the cat, Carmen the dog, Dorji and Condra the pigs, and Grady the dog. Thank you. If you turn to the tan sheet in your prayer book, let us say Shakyamuni's Buddha 3 times. Taya ta om mune mune maha munae soha. Taya ta om mune mune maha munae soha. Taya ta om mune mune maha munae soha. The 4 immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Once in Tibetan. Samchen tam che de wa dang de we gur dang den par gur chik Nyal Drelwar Gurchik Dunyam Me Pe Ewadang Mi Drelwar Gurchik Nearing Chagdang Nidang Drelway Tang Yam Lane Pargurchik. And on the pink sheet, we'll say 7 Tara mantras and then 8 Chenrezig mantras. Om Tari Tu Re Soha. 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Om Mani Padme Hum.
There we go. Good morning to you. Let's begin with a little meditation. Calm our minds, okay? Let's sit comfortably with your back erect, back straight, eyes partially open, and relax your body. Relax your mind. Relax your mind. What by that I mean, remind yourself you don't have to think about the future, the past. Just be here right now. And simply watch your breathing without controlling it. But very carefully recognize when you're breathing in with discriminating awareness and when you're breathing out. And try to notice the endpoints when your attention might wander. That is, when it's just changing from an inhalation to an exhalation. Try to watch that exact point. with the mind a little bit cleared, try to set a motivation for this morning, today, this week, this year, this life, that we use this time for the greatest benefit for ourself in a spiritual sense, not just ordinary worldly remedies, but spiritual remedies, and to become a better person that interacts with all other living beings, that we might be an inspiration and a benefit to all others as a result of living this life. And then bring your attention back to the present. So how many people here this morning are here for the first time? Anyone? Oh, always have a couple people. Hi, good morning. Have you meditated before? That wasn't confusing for you? Was there anyone who'd never meditated before that was here? Just the three of you, okay. Oh, one of you had not meditated, okay. So, as you know, generally meditation means to some mental activity that you do to familiarize yourself with a wholesome state, as Geshe tells you every week when he's here. So I wanted to mention again today, we've been talking successively the last 2 weeks, the last 3 weeks, about the first 3 of the 4 immeasurable thoughts that were mentioned in the prayer at the beginning. Do you know what they are? What's the first one? Immeasurable. Well, yeah, is called what? Immeasurable love, right? And then immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy we talked about last time. And the last one is called immeasurable equanimity, right? So what that means is at the beginning we did a prayer as what's your name again? Theon had said she was remembering the words, may all living beings abide, be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. Wording might be a little bit different. May all living beings, secondly, be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. That's compassion, limitless compassion or immeasurable compassion. May all living beings abide in happiness, remain in happiness that is without suffering, never be separated from that. And the fourth one is called immeasurable equanimity. May all living beings be free of attachment to some, let's say friends, and distance from others, like we might call enemies or people that push your buttons that you're unhappy with. Does that ever happen to you? Do you feel partial to some and distant from others? From a spiritual point of view, we might even think that's natural, and there are some people that we should feel close to, like fellow Tar Heels, and there's certain people that we should feel distant from, damn Yankees, or I don't know, some terrorists or something like that. But a mind of equanimity is not a mind that is oblivious to differences, but it takes a larger picture, and it looks at the long term and sees that over a long period of time, all individuals are equal in the categories of being friends and enemies and strangers. Over a long period of time, there's no one who remains a friend forever, or loved one. There's no one who remains an enemy forever. It's our holding on to these categories in our mind, remembering certain things that people did that, what would you say, ingratiated them, pleased us in some way that we call them friends. And they get instituted in our mind as friend. And there are other individuals that have done something that annoyed us, pushed our button in some way, criticized us, and we put them in the category of enemy. Everyone else is sort of like, in a sense, a stranger, or a category. What's another neutral category, that you don't feel particularly close or distant from. But from the time you were in the sandbox, there might have been, as a kid playing in kindergarten or something, there may have been people that you were your friends and later became your enemies. Was that ever the case? You remember? Not just in the sandbox, but throughout life, there were people that were your enemies then that later became your dearest friend. So close and dear to you that to be separated from them was a cause of tears and anguish. Has that happened to anyone? Yeah, someone who was originally maybe you were resistant to. And every single person that you meet that was once a stranger, they either become someone you put in the camp of friend or enemy. They might still be neutral in your mind, but they're no longer a stranger. So these categories are not definite. That's the point of equanimity. So what we're wishing here is that all living beings abide in the state of equanimity that is free from being close to some, and being close usually due to attachment, and being distant from other people due to anger, repulsion, hatred, or anger, or something like that. In order to imagine how wonderful that would be for others, well, you can imagine if there was not that kind of partiality, and there is in the world, right? Our side, like the terrorist organization, what's it called in the Middle East, right? ISIS or ISIL. Do you know the differences? Same. S stands for in the Levant, exactly. Yeah. Do you know what the Levant is? I lived in Beirut, Lebanon, for some time. That area of the Middle East is called the Levant. Right? How far does the Levant extend? It's mainly that area. So, in the eyes of those, it seems, in the eyes of those individuals, very partial. There's us, and there's them, and them are enemies. And probably even some of for them, some of us are also in their in their own world. If you didn't wear the proper clothing or shave your face appropriately, or you did other things, also you were an enemy. So there's a great deal of partiality, and we can see in extreme cases like that how detrimental that is for not only for individual well-being but for world peace. To imagine how wonderful it would be if individuals like that had a mind of equanimity. You could also translate equanimity as impartiality, right? To be impartial, not judging that there's someone that you would benefit out of attachment, affection for them. You're doling out the soup, you're doling out the dessert, and you give your friend an extra scoop. Your enemy, you don't give them as much, or you spit in it or something like that. That would be an example of what? Partiality. And what would be another word, stronger word for partiality? Is there none? Favoritism. Okay, favoring those that are that word specifically centers on the one aspect of helping the friend, right? Favoritism. Equanimity, impartiality is a negative word, right? Not partial. The word in Tibetan is just a positive word, so maybe equanimity is a good tangyom rather than making it into a negative word. You know what I mean by negative? Impartiality, not partial, but it has that meaning. In our own lives, if we were to be able to be impartial, we could appreciate more and more the benefits of that, because it brings them out. It allows your mind more flexibility in dealing with people, helping even the stranger just as much as you would the friend. Of course, we have karmic responsibilities to our family, our children, our friends, our community. That goes without saying. So being impartial doesn't mean that you just go around and have no special sense of karmic obligation to those that you have responsibilities to. But when it comes to need, that all living beings would be equally potential recipients of your compassion and love. Right now, there's some people that we would imagine are not potential recipients of our love. What do you think? Is that right? In your own mind? This. Who would fall into that category? Certainly, maybe for some of us, ISIS, or the on a very gross level, the competitor of your football team. Notre Dame this last weekend or something like that. I understand it was a very close game. Did anyone, mostly ladies here, but did anyone watch the game? Pardon? Painfully so. Okay, it was close game. Tar Heels. I was taking a walk at the time, and I saw some look like World War II vintage airplanes flying over. I was walking over from McGregor, where there are a lot of golf courses, and there's some fellows who told me that they fly over over the city every time there's a Tar Heels game, even though the Tar Heels were playing in Indiana or something. So that's very partial, right? So in general, there are two kinds of equanimity. There's the equanimity that simply views the categories of friends, enemies, and strangers, and recognizes through meditation that over the course of time, these categories are not definite. It may be that at any one time, someone is sitting in the friend chair, someone is sitting in the enemy chair, and someone is sitting in the stranger chair. Do you remember musical chairs? As a good example, is sometimes used in meditation. You imagine in front of you 3 individuals. One now that's a friend. Maybe they're sitting on one side. The enemy is in the center, your focus, someone that pushes your buttons. And on the other side, someone that you recognize from the bus, but you don't, or the neighborhood that you don't particularly know. And so if you heard stories about their good fortune or bad fortune, you wouldn't be swayed one way or the other, sort of stranger. And then the music starts. Mrs. Kinney starts playing the piano, and they get up and they're running around, and the piano stops, and now they sit down in different seats. The friend has become the enemy is the stranger is the friend. We know from our own experience that can happen in this lifetime. Even things that we thought were so definite, siblings that love each other as children become, so antagonistic. So it's not saying equanimity doesn't mean that there's never differentiation between people, but to recognize that these categories are not definite. And even within the sphere of recognizing, some people might consider themselves enemies or friends or strangers, or in a certain circumstance, your group or your mind might view them as that, still to see the potential of them changing, and not to favor some out of attachment, the friends, and be willing to harm others or to discard others out of resentment or anger. Does that make sense to you? Does that seem, would anyone see a counter argument why that would not be a good spiritual quality to develop? You three ladies that came today for the first time, what do you think? Back there. Are you college students? High school, okay. Maybe you'll take that as a compliment. I thought you were college students. Very mature. Does that seem like a reasonable spiritual quality, impartiality? Would we, some people might criticize, I think in the last couple of years, sometimes the population, certain numbers of the population might criticize the president for being impartial. You should criticize, you shouldn't be impartial. Some people you should, help, or some people, your own race. Some African Americans criticize the president, isn't it, that he didn't do enough for African Americans? Maybe in a sense, being a bit impartial, but in general, we can see impartiality is positive. There's a deeper kind of impartiality that those of you who have studied about the Buddhism and what we call the Mahayana, the great vehicle, which is trying to develop compassion for all living beings. There's an exclusive meditation on compassion, which goes beyond just equalizing friend, enemy, and stranger, like seeing that in the course of time, the musical chairs, the categories of friend, enemy, and stranger are not definite. Going beyond that to try to recognize that all living beings are equal in being potential recipients of our love and compassion, what I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So to think, if someone comes for your aid that you might categorize as an enemy or a stranger, or if a friend comes for your aid in the case of being sick or in need, like a physician who has an obligation not to discriminate, supposedly. Is that right? Who's a physician here? Anyone a physician? Do you have in your...
First rule of physician is to do no harm.
Oh, okay. I have that bumper sticker on my car. Do no harm.
The first rule of physician
Okay.
is to discriminate, to do no harm.
Okay. But the gentleman behind you, you're a physician, right? So is there something about being impartial if people come to you in the...
Yeah, I mean, you help people the best you can, no matter if you like them or not, or agree with them or not, or
Is it stated in some kind of legalese or in the
not allowed to discriminate. You're not allowed to discriminate, and that's official policy.
you're not allowed, you shouldn't. So if you do discriminate, you could be censured or something like that. So that's considered to be negative. Right? So that, in a sense, to try to develop a state of equanimity yourself like this can then, when you say that prayer, that immeasurable, the thought of immeasurable equanimity, thinking how wonderful it would be if all living beings were free of partiality, were free of attachment to those that are close and distant from those that they feel some hatred or anger for or distrust of. Then you can understand the benefit of that if you generate it yourself. So, but generally when we say this, we're wishing that other living beings, all living beings, and yourself is included, would be in that state. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could be in that state, a state of equanimity? If you're doling out the food and in the soup kitchen, and the people who are walking by you, some of them are more attractive and some of them are less attractive, and you give the attractive ones because you feel close to them, or you maybe have some expectation that they'll become your friend. You give them more. That would be being partial, right? So to be impartial and to start to overcome that that state of mind that differentiates. Many years ago, when I was in England at a Buddhist center there called Manjushri Institute, there was a friend of the institute, a student, a professor who was a professor of psychology at, I think it was Neen College, not absolutely certain. His name was Malcolm Wally. So Malcolm took these teachings very much to heart and tried to apply them to his own psychological practice. And he devised a course once, a meditation for the helping professions. And it was advertised, and it was at the institute, at our Manjushri Institute, a Buddhist center. And it was the biggest subscribed course that had ever taken place up to that time. It was amazing. People that were social workers and teachers and doctors and prison guards and all sorts of things, nurses, came. And one of the meditations that he taught during that course, he had culled from the Buddhist teachings certain topics that he thought were particularly useful, was this meditation on equanimity. Not just the immeasurable thought that all sentient, how wonderful it would be free, how wonderful it would be if all living beings abided in equanimity, free of attachment and hatred, but actually try to develop that yourself. And his rationale for that was that in the helping professions, one of the big defects that was noticed, or a defect that was noticed and maybe not noticed sometime by the person themselves, was transference. Do you know what that means? Do you know what that means? Transference? Yeah.
Projecting your own perception.
Yeah, I guess that could mean that. But what is it? What does it mean in the helping profession? You were nodding as though.
Sort of identifying with the other person and developing a relationship that is not objective.
Yeah, exactly. So the same thing, but particularly in the helping professions, like the soap opera story of the psychologist who is fond of the patient and therefore helps them more, maybe ends up having a relationship with them or something like that, or a teacher that helps the student, not in an objective sense, not just because he or she sees the potential in the student, but because they're have affection for them, or in the case of discarding some people, not liking their family or something about them, not helping them, transferring. How can you use the word transference in that sense? Transferring your resentment, your judgment, or so that apparently is a common phenomena, and the people that attended the course found that was very useful for in their evaluations of the course. They found that was one of the most useful things, that they had a tool now to deal with the potentiality of transference in their own professions by meditating on equanimity. So when we talk about immeasurable equanimity, again, we're trying to think how wonderful it would be if everyone abided in equanimity. The people that we interact in the world, not only because it would be nice for us not to be, singled out in a negative way. You might feel you still like what do you think about that? If your spouses or your companions were equanimous, impartial, and they didn't give you the same, they gave the same affection to other people as they gave you. That might not seem right? Well, here again, there's karmic responsibility. Equanimity doesn't mean that you don't still spend time and have karmic responsibilities to your companions, your family, your children, your loved ones, and so forth. but that you, in the time of dealing with individuals, when you're doling out the food at the table, you give everyone equal credence, and when it's a time to alleviate the suffering, like the doctor, you don't discriminate that there are some that are more worthy of your care. They're equally recipients of your love, potential recipients of your love, and equally recipients of your compassion. Remember what love and compassion mean? The young ladies that are here for the first time wouldn't know the Buddhist take on that, but some of you who were here before, do you remember this gentleman in the blue shirt? Do you know what the difference? Yeah, you. Yeah, yeah. Okay, you don't remember what love and compassion is? Remind me of your name.
Pat.
Pat.
Love is the desire that others be happy, and compassion is the desire that others not suffer.
Right. From Buddhist perspective, in English, that's more or less what it means also in generally dictionary-wise, right? But there's a slight differentiation here in Buddhism. Those two states of mind, if one of them is present in your own continuum, if you have love, there will be the potential for compassion. It won't be necessarily active at the same moment. And when the compassion is there, wishing others be free of suffering, the love will be in the form of a potential. It won't be actually actively present at that exact thought instant. Like you would see a little child in the supermarket lost, or the store crying for mommy, and you might alternate between love and compassion for it, wanting it to be free of suffering, wanting to soothe it in some way, or wanting to make it happy, give it a candy bar or something like that, or soothe it in some way. Dangerous, right? Yeah, I found that some years ago, not that long ago, in Wisconsin. I was at the library in my robes in a public library, and a grandmother had been outside with her two grandchildren. She'd gone into either the library or the post office, and not thinking well, she'd left the children outside to play, and when she came out, one of the children were gone. A little boy had run off. And so she was distraught, and I was helping her. We were walking around the neighborhood. At a certain point, we got separated, and I was walking around asking people if they'd seen this little boy. And then suddenly a police car came up with a siren running, and someone had called that this guy in a dress was walking around asking if they'd seen a little boy. So this is our time, right? Maybe an earlier time that wouldn't have been problematic, but because we're more aware of that kind of thing now, you have to be careful. But, pardon me?
Also, there's this greater awareness. It's not really important, but there's a greater awareness of food allergies. Sometimes mothers can be really unhappy if you give their children food that they don't approve of.
Yes, and of course, if you gave someone a peanut bar or something and they had a allergic reaction, that would be...
Or just even, there's a lot of mothers now who don't want their children to have sugar.
Or gluten.
So it's tricky.
Yeah. Or turkey?
Tricky.
Oh, tricky. I thought it's also turkey.
I mean, it could be, but I have no idea.
I know some gluten Nazis, yeah.
Yeah, those people. Some of them are mothers.
Yes. Yes.
On the topic of equanimity, how do the Buddhists approach someone who's a convicted serial killer? How do they think of that?
So, good question. So when you see generally two dynamic pairs of people at executions, or when someone is awaiting execution or sentencing, you see the people outside with placards and, kill him, kill him, kill him. And even at the executions, who are there waiting for the person to be executed. And you see individuals who are urging a stay of execution, or, not to be angry at the person. Even among the victims, what is this, in your own estimation, when you hear about victims, when you hear about their reactions to the person that has been found guilty of, let's say, killing their child, or in a car accident or something like that, or murder or rape or something, generally are people vindictive? Or do you hear them saying, oh, it's not going to help my child who's already dead to execute this person? It's more rare, isn't it? That second attitude of compassion and so forth. Does that affect you when that happens? Do you feel ennobled when you hear that? Or do you feel that that person is wrong and they should have been executed? It's interesting. That shows something about our own. Pardon?
Like how they could forgive.
Right. I myself find that ennobling, but maybe that's because I'm trying to develop those kind of thoughts. Not that I have them naturally. So in the case of someone who is evil, still, remember at the beginning I mentioned that these three chairs, so to speak, the enemy, the friend, and the stranger, these categories do exist at one time, any one time, to our conventional minds. There's some people who push our buttons, who are perhaps problematic for us or dangerous for us, not only us, but for society. Killing people, or using people for their financial gain, pyramid schemes of, crooks and so forth. So we would say that they are in a category that we would naturally feel some resentment for, that we might call, maybe enemy is not the word that we would always call to mind. When I ask people sometime if they have any enemies, they say, I have no enemies at all. But when they actually evaluate, there's certain people that push their buttons. You know what I mean by that? Is that a phrase you use here in the South? So-and-so pushes my buttons, irritate you in some way, or that you feel uncomfortable with, that they might be trying to take advantage of you and you feel a certain distance from, and so forth. So think of those categories. So from a Buddhist perspective, to recognize that even that individual is a potential recipient of your compassion, a deserving recipient of your compassion. To answer your question, what was your name?
Suzanne.
Suzanne. So to answer that, from a Buddhist perspective, to have compassion for even the enemies. In Tibet, the communist Chinese invaded Tibet around 1949, and for about 10 years, they were spreading throughout Tibet toward the capital, toward the west, toward Lhasa and further west. And in 1959, the Dalai Lama and a great number of other people escaped back to India and have been in exile. Many of them have been in exile that entire time. When asked about the Chinese, communist Chinese, who have, taken over the country, taken away the freedom, especially the religious freedom of the Tibetans, you might think that the Dalai Lama would have a certain anger toward, or hatred of, the Chinese, right? Would that not be natural? Your country is still under the influence, you can't go back and so forth, but he has no hatred for them. He is in a state of equanimity. He sees them as also in previous lives, those individuals, from a Buddhist perspective, this is not our only life, right? I don't know if you ladies know that from a Buddhist perspective, our minds, subtle aspect of our mind continues after this lifetime, has continued from previous lifetimes up till now. So in past lifetimes, these individuals that are now oppressing our people, let's say the Chinese, I'm not Tibetan, but let's say from a Tibetan perspective, they have been our close friends. Some of them have been our mothers in the previous life. Maybe if you go back further enough, all of them have been our mother one time or another and have cherished us as the most precious thing in their lives. And in the future, these individuals who are now viewed as enemies, even in this lifetime, we know from the sandbox experience, they can become our friends, even this lifetime. If not this lifetime, definitely we will encounter them again in the future. And it will not always be the same. They won't always be enemies. Sometimes they'll be friends. Sometimes they'll be so dear to us. They will be our mothers. They will be our lovers. So looking in that perspective, sort of stepping back, seeing the big picture, a practitioner of the Mahayana, the great vehicle of Tibetan Buddhism, would try to view all of these living beings with equanimity and wish that upon others. How wonderful it would be if all living beings were to reside in a state of equanimity. Wouldn't that be wonderful for them? There would be less problem for those individuals. They themselves would have an inner kind of peace that's potentially the basis for developing compassion and love for all living beings. So they would be well on their way to developing, spiritual qualities. Does that make sense to you? Yes. Yeah. We have a couple more microphones. Anyway.
I just had a question about, like using the example of fleeing to India. I mean, there's the compassion, but there's also the action, which is not, it seems to be, you would treat someone who's coming to harm you differently than you would treat your child. Your actions are not the same. So you have like a mental response and a physical response.
Exactly. There's two different things here. Again, so I'll elaborate a little bit on this. When I say that these categories do exist, there's some people that might be dangerous for us, and we have to recognize that. We have to be vigilant. And I may have mentioned when we talked about immeasurable compassion a couple of weeks ago that I taught a course in India once where some Israelis, young Israelis had come. Were you here when I talked about that? So a meditation course, Buddhist meditation course, and almost all young Israelis, or all, have to serve in the armed forces, both men and women. Did you know that? And they had just finished, these kids had just finished their, 2 years or whatever their thing is. And they were taking a break before they went back to get on with their lives in Israel. They were traveling through the East in India, and they'd come across this course. And when I was mentioning about compassion, 2 of the fellows got up and left the lecture, and they didn't come back. It was a week-long seminar, so I didn't see them the next day. And the day after that, I asked their girlfriends if they could ask what was wrong, and they said, well, Ari or whatever the fellow's name was, he was in charge of interrogating Palestinian prisoners and was taught that he couldn't have compassion for them, couldn't have any sympathy for them, because they could take advantage of that. And as soon as your back was turned, they could, they would kill you, or not, or figuratively, that if you had compassion, they might go back on the street and engage in terrorism again and so forth. And I said, please tell them to come back and I'll explain a little bit more about what's meant by compassion. Because this is an offshoot of the Mahayana sense of equanimity, that all living beings are equally suitable to be recipients of our love, equally suitable to be recipients of our compassion. So within the sphere of being vigilant, recognizing that they now pose a problem, they're sitting in the quote enemy seat or the button seat or whatever you want to call it, the caution seat, still recognizing that that's not always the case, standing back and not being, focusing on them with anger and resentment and maybe torturing them unduly and so forth. Still being vigilant, but having the potential for compassion. So when Buddhists talk about love and compassion, it doesn't mean everyone's the same, invite in the child molesters into our kindergarten. It's okay for them to be school teachers. And it doesn't mean that. You'd still have compassion for individuals that have problematic behavior. Understanding that in previous lives they didn't have this. There might have been causes for that this lifetime. Wishing that they could be free of that problem, rather than just being punished for it. Because not having that sense of compassion leads you to seeing only one solution, to eradicate them, incarcerate them, torture them, kill them, or whatever. Still being vigilant, though, not being wishy-washy and allowing them to harm others. Did you have another? You were going to have another question. Yeah.
What I've heard several times is that the relatives of murder victims, what they've said after the murderer of their child or friend or fiance or whatever has been executed, is that they don't feel any relief.
Interesting. So sometimes people feel, what's the other word they use? Closure, right?
Yeah, they don't feel any closure either.
That's sort of like the politically nice word nowadays. They don't feel, yeah, exactly. They don't feel any relief. Interesting. Some people claim to get some satisfaction from the execution, but in the long term, I think they recognize it didn't really change anything. They still have the same demons, the sense of loss and so forth. So I'd like to spend a couple minutes. Yes, you have a question. Yeah, put one more out here.
If I may add something about, being vigilant in terms of protecting ourselves, being safe when there is danger from another human being. It's a very compassionate act from my perspective, in the sense that what it also does is, if you are successful in keeping the person from doing more harm by being vigilant, you've also in a way offered them a service, in the sense that they have not created more negativity in their mind stream by being able to commit the act. Mm-hmm. So it's not just for your benefit. It really is a benefit. It's a benefit that's bigger than just yourself.
If that's your motivation, yeah, right.
But it can be.
Yes, definitely. So Venerable, keep it right there. This young lady has a question. Yeah, I think you have to turn it on. She may have turned it off. Okay.
So when
you have to put it up to your mouth.
If you're talking about having compassion with vigilance, is another way of saying that, is having compassion for somebody while having appropriate boundaries for their current reality?
Well, I use the word vigilance in terms of someone who might be dangerous. In terms of, you wouldn't necessarily use the same word vigilance in talking about a loved one, a child. Well, still with a child, having compassion, you still want to be vigilant. They don't fall off the cliff, or they don't put your hand in the fire, or something like that. But really, in a broader sense, you want to have your compassion conjoined with wisdom. So here the wisdom can manifest as vigilance, in the case of someone who might be potentially dangerous. So the wisdom would mean recognizing that they could, if left without vigilance, harm you or others. Wisdom sometimes just realizing the wisdom of impermanence, realizing that the suffering that someone is undergoing right now will end, not to get carried away, or exuberantly, like there's some Sprint commercial. Did you see that Sprint commercial for iPhone? These ladies are talking about the new Sprint plan, unlimited minutes for iPhone 6. They're all screaming, and all the glasses in the restaurant break, and the windows are breaking because of their high pitch. Not not recognizing. Well, let's say in the case of compassion and love, they should be conjoined with wisdom. First, the wisdom of change, understanding that things will change, so that suffering and joy, even the joy that you imagine others having right now, will not be lasting as long as your mind might think, first of all. So to be a little more dispassionate. It doesn't mean you can't smile and get excited about things, but to have a certain amount of composure, restraint, impartiality, and so forth. Okay? So let's do a little meditation. Unless you brought the microphone back because you wanted to make a comment, right?
I just had a question.
Yeah.
You used the term karmic responsibility a couple times. I was just wondering what that means and how that affects the impartiality.
Well, when we take on, in terms of karmic responsibility, what I mean by that is when you take on a commitment in a relationship, say if you get married, or you adopt a child, or you have some other kind of responsibility like that you have you've assumed a certain responsibility as a teacher, as a guardian, as a doctor, as a helper. To simply let that go, that is a certain kind of promise you've made. So if you neglect that, or even go against that promise, you've essentially lying, and you're creating negative karma. Karma is an Indian word that means action, right? And actions have results. I like to say, as I've mentioned before, that I think a nice, succinct explanation of the law of karma and its results is what Christ said in the Bible: "Ye reap what ye sow." It will come back to you. Whatever actions you do, they'll have repercussions, not necessarily immediately, sometime in the distant future, maybe even in future lives. So we have certain karmic responsibilities in the sense that we've made promises. If we've taken vows, those are certainly karmic responsibilities.
So then we are sort of called then to have a certain level of impartiality with those responsibilities, or we're sort of supposed to view it as those roles of friend, enemy, stranger are present within that relationship?
Well,
Does that make sense?
the example that we mentioned at the beginning is a good example of that, I think. Say the therapist who might have a wanting within the role of wanting to alleviate the suffering of the patients, might still favor some because of some subtle attraction or attachment for them, and maybe not give as much help to others. Give them, what's the word? Short shrift? Is that the right way to say? Do you know what I mean? Like not give them their whole effort because they're unattractive or uninteresting or some prejudice. So within, having that karmic responsibility to help, there's still the possibility of partiality raising its head and preventing us from fulfilling that responsibility in a beautiful way. Okay, let's as I like this joke in the church. It says, "Let us pray. Let us meditate." Okay. So sit comfortably again. And imagine in front of you 3 chairs. They can either be, wooden chairs or plastic chairs or upholstered chairs, whatever you like. And the center chair is within that. Imagine seated someone who pushes your buttons. Either someone you consider an enemy, someone who you're, afraid of in some way that might harm you or that you don't like. On the right side, another chair, someone that you're very fond of. Might be your loved one, your friends, someone that you don't feel any animosity toward, that you would definitely call a friend. I hope there's someone in that category. And on the left of the center, another chair, someone that you recognize, let's say, or maybe just an amorphous human being. All these can be human beings, or they could be animals, I suppose. Generally, it's better to think of them as humans here, even if they're animals in human shape. A stranger on the chair on the left. Now investigate the person in the center, the so-called enemy. Try to go back and recognize why you're putting them in that category. Somehow the mind also holding that individual as definitely an enemy. Oh, we even know sibling rivalry, the loved ones sometimes we have arguments with, and I hate you, we say, and then later we love again. But recognizing there was some incident in our past where the so-called enemy said something or did something that we felt harmed us, or maybe we're jealous of them. Interestingly, we put them in the camp of enemy because we feel they're unjustly revered by others, something we should be getting. Whatever the reason, recognize there was some origin of this. It's not as though they're inherently an enemy. Those individuals do have friends. Even Hitler, had his wife, and I assume his mother loved him, and there were people who adored him and so forth. Saddam Hussein and the ISIS fighters and other people that we might find repugnant. They're not inherently enemy. But for the most part, just to recognize that that category can change. It's not a definite category. And look at the friend on the right. Why do we consider them a friend? Perhaps they gave us aid. They helped us. They say sweet things to us. They spend time with us. They sympathize with us. When we have problems, we can go to them and they'll lend an ear. But that arose at a certain time. There are some people that might consider them enemies, and they themselves have enemies. They're not definitely a friend. And in our lifetime, we know there have been friends that have been just as close, or maybe we haven't experienced that, but it definitely can happen that friends that are just as close can become later enemies for the smallest reasons. Something we say some harsh words out of anger, we hurt their feelings. So there's nothing definite about them being friend, although right now they are recognized as friend. They have that label. They function in that way. Then on the left, the other seat, the stranger. Right now, we don't feel particularly close or distant from them. If we hear that they have a bad disease or that they've won the lottery or have had some good fortune, we don't feel particularly elated or disappointed. But simply in acquainting ourselves with them, meeting them, we may make some judgment if we have some connection with them, if they say something nice or bad, and they can fall into the category of friend or enemy. In fact, often they do right away. As soon as we make judgments about people, we like them or we don't. What do we talk about? First impressions, you know. Some people are very superficial. We may judge them on their appearance, whether they, like in school, whether they look like a nerd, or if you are a nerd, maybe you like that. You know, they're close. Now imagine the music starts, and these three individuals get up from their chairs. They start walking around like musical chairs. And the music stops and they sit down. Now the friend is seated in the center, in the enemy chair. They have become your enemy. And the enemy has become a stranger. You've lost contact with them, or it's another life and you encountered them and you don't recognize them as an enemy. The stranger has become your friend, perhaps, in this iteration. Is that possible? Yeah. The music starts again, and now they sit down, and maybe again another combination, slightly different, or maybe another similar combination at the beginning. Again and again, changing. There's nothing definite about the categories of friend, enemy, and stranger. Now imagine in front of you all the people who are problematic for you. All the enemies, all the people who push your button. It might be different political bent of mind, or those that you see as harming the environment or harming something in some way. Those behind you, imagine your friends, so they're not foremost in your attention, sort of behind your back, filling space. And all around space, infinite living beings that you've not yet encountered this lifetime, although you have known them in past lifetimes, all the strangers to you right at the moment. And see through these reasonings if you can develop in your own mind a sense of equanimity, that they have equally been friend, enemy, and stranger. They will be. So even at the moment, they are equally friend, enemy, and stranger. That they are, from a Mahayana sense, equal in being potential recipients of your love and compassion, your generosity, your patience. Even the criminals, even those that are dangerous, being vigilant, having wisdom, those that help you, not being overcome by their kindness and favoring them out of attachment, but recognizing they have been your enemy in past lives, will be again in the future while we're still in cyclic existence. Just a mind that spreads out over all living beings and thinks they are equally recipients. They're equal in being recipients of my love and compassion. What a wonderful, soothing feeling that is, especially if the mind has been very partial. If you're holding some people as enemies, holding grudges, to see the potentiality of them becoming friends again, seeing the potential of still, even behind their backs, without making a big deal of it, helping the enemy. And then think how wonderful it would be if all living beings could abide in a state of equanimity that's free of attachment to some and distance from others. Try to hold that. If you can generate the taste of that thought authentically, try to hold it single-pointedly. Use the various reasonings that we've been talking about. Having a mind of equanimity, of compassion and love doesn't mean that you are, as the New Zealanders say, a wuss, a pushover. You're still vigilant. You're still wise. You're not totally ebullient, totally overcome with happiness when good fortune occurs to you or to those you like, understanding that that's impermanent. When tragedy occurs, you're not totally overcome by sorrow so that you pull your hair out or commit suicide or see no solution. Understanding impermanence, things will change. This too will change. And then think finally, whatever good energy I've created this morning by listening to the Dharma teachings, Buddhist teachings, thinking about them as you have with good questions, analyzing them, and then meditating on them. All of these good actions that have left imprints in our mind, may those imprints ripen not simply in some fleeting happiness in the future, but may they become the cause of my continued spiritual development, day by day, week by week, year by year, life by life. As a result of this, may I become a better person for the sake of others. May I find satisfaction, contentment, total bliss, and from that perspective of bliss and wisdom, contentment, compassion for others, be able to help all living beings. As a result of these karmic imprints we've put in our mind this morning, may this become the first cause of that in some cases. Thank you very much. Sorry, I've gone a couple of minutes over. It's 10:14. Thank you very much for your attendance and hope to see you again sometime. Take care.